Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. Our goal is to record several good takes so that this small 11-piece orchestra will sound like a 60-piece orchestra when we mix it all together. And if this is as successful as your tuning sounds, we'll be in very good shape.
I love the climax in the strings, along with at the opening. You'll hear of course, an opening flute solo, and I love to exploit Stephen's sound. And then the marimba sneaks in underneath, and I just like the sound. I like that also. But when the strings first enter, I love the lushness. I love lush strings, and that's why I like to write for orchestra as well. But I really like the way the strings eventually throughout the movement start to take over and become more prominent. They're no longer just an accompaniment. And I think that and also the harmonies become more tense. They start out rather simply in what you might say, oh, that's beautiful. And then they become a little more tense as it goes on, and I like that transition.
Good. Unless you want to do it again, I'm okay with that.
One take, Stephen. Just kidding.
All right? I think so.
Stephen, I've written several pieces for him, and he is very similar to me. We love, traditional music. Of course, he's one of the best Baroque flutists in the country, in the world. And yet he likes to try new things, and that's exactly where my head is. And he had bought an effects processor, and he said, you got to come over and listen to this thing. And he just started to show me a bunch of different things it could do. And I've used echo in effects processing a number of times for him. And basically what it sounds like, it's almost like a traditional offstage trumpet. Music is oftentimes very abstract in that I'll just sit down and I'll just start playing. I'm a pianist, and I'll sit down and start playing around with an idea. I'll usually have some kind of concept. I want this movement to sound a certain way or exploit a certain technique, but I never sit down and say, I want this movement to reflect Moonlight, as in this case. A lot of times I'll tap in on my husband, who's a poet, and I'll tap in on him and I'll say, what does this remind you of? Because a lot of times the music is just it doesn't sound like abstract music. It doesn't sound like Sonata No. 1 or String Quartet No. 1. It sounds a little more like there is probably something, a picture going on with it, or a motivation other than just pure music. And so a lot of times my titles just kind of are whimsical, or like I say, I'll listen to it, or I'll have my husband listen to it, and he will say, that really reminds me of, and that's a lot of my titles come that way.
A big full string sound like a string orchestra. But the way Nancy wrote the piece, it was basically one string player per part, and there were 11 parts. So that made for a pretty thin sound, especially in the recording studio. So we decided just to layer it, and we did that 4 times. When the strings play again, this phenomenon called the chorus effect takes place. And if you just take the same thing and duplicate it, it's just increasing one channel instead of all of those parts. So it just has a much fuller sound and richer sound if we actually record those things 4 times. So instead of a string ensemble of 11 pieces, we had a string ensemble of 44.